It was 1916, the Battle of the Somme, and I had been fighting for what felt like an eternity. My name is Private Thomas Baker, and this is the story of the night I wish I could forget. I had been sent on a reconnaissance mission with Corporal Jameson and Private Carter. Our objective was simple: scout the abandoned German trench ahead and report back. Intelligence suggested it was deserted, but we all knew better than to trust intelligence. The night was cold, and a thick fog had rolled in, making visibility almost non-existent. With every step, the mud seemed to suck us further into the earth, as if trying to claim us for itself. We moved in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The war had changed us all. Jameson, once a jovial man with a booming laugh, now spoke in hushed tones, his eyes always darting around nervously. Carter, barely out of his teens, had the haunted look of someone who had seen too much too soon. As for me, I was just trying to survive, one day at a time. The trench loomed ahead, a jagged scar in the earth. We slid down into it, the walls rising around us like the maw of some great beast. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder in decay. My skin prickled with unease as we moved deeper into the darkness. "Stay alert," Jameson whispered, his voice barely audible. "This doesn't feel right." I nodded, gripping my rifle tighter. The trench seemed to stretch on forever, each turn revealing nothing but more darkness. I could hear the faint sound of dripping water and the scurrying of rats, but there were no signs of life. No enemy soldiers, no traps, nothing. We reached what appeared to be a command post. Papers and maps were strewn across a makeshift table, and a lantern, long extinguished, hung from a hook. Jameson motioned for us to search the area. I moved to the far end, where a stack of crates caught my eye. As I rifled through them, something cold and slimy brushed against my hand. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's wrong?" Carter asked, his voice trembling. "Nothing," I replied, shaking my head. "Just a rat." But it wasn't just a rat. There was something else here, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. An oppressive sense of dread hung over the place, making it hard to breathe. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the task at hand. We needed to gather whatever intelligence we could and get out of there. Jameson was examining the maps when he suddenly stiffened. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We all fell silent, straining to listen. At first there was nothing. Then faintly, I heard it too. A low, guttural moan, like the sound of someone in agony. It seemed to come from the far end of the trench, where the shadows were thickest. "Maybe it's a wounded soldier," Carter suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Or a trap," Jameson countered. "Stay close and be ready for anything." We moved towards the sound, our nerves stretched taut. The moaning grew louder, more insistent. It led us to a narrow passage, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Jameson went first, followed by Carter, then me. The passage twisted and turned, the walls closing in around us. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light of my lantern. We emerged into a small chamber, and the sight that greeted us made my blood run cold. Bodies, dozens of them, piled haphazardly, their eyes wide open in terror. Some wore German uniforms, others British. But there was something else, something that made my skin crawl. The bodies were not decomposing as they should have been. They looked almost fresh. "What the hell happened here?" Carter whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Jameson replied, his face pale. "But we need to get out of here, now." As we turned to leave, the moaning started again, louder this time, more insistent. It was coming from one of the bodies. My heart hammered in my chest as I approached it, dreading what I might find. The body was that of a young German soldier, his eyes wide with fear, but he was breathing, shallow and ragged. "He's alive," I exclaimed, dropping to my knees beside him. "We need to help him." Jameson hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but be quick. This place gives me the creeps." As I reached out to touch the soldier, his eyes snapped to mine. They were filled with a terror so profound that it sent a shiver down my spine. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, his grip icy cold. "Ernick, dear," he gasped out, his voice barely audible. Gehen, weg. I didn't understand much German, but his meaning was clear enough. Not here. Go away. He's telling us to leave, I said, looking up at Jameson. Smart man, Jameson replied. Let's go. But as I tried to pull away, the soldier's grip tightened. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound echoed off the walls, a cacophony of agony and despair. The other bodies began to stir, their limbs twitching and jerking. It was like watching a nightmare come to life. Run, Jameson shouted, shoving me towards the passage. Go! We bolted, scrambling back the way we had come. The trench seemed to close in around us, the walls pressing in. The moans and screams followed us, growing louder, more frenzied. I could hear the shuffling of feet, the rustle of clothing. They were coming after us. We burst out of the passage and into the main trench, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. But the nightmare wasn't over. The bodies in the command post were moving now, their eyes fixed on us. They stumbled towards us, their movements jerky and unnatural. What the hell is happening? Carter cried, his voice breaking with panic. I don't know, Jameson shouted back. Just keep moving. We ran through the trench, the undead soldiers hot on our heels. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to almost nothing. I could hear the pounding of my own heart, the rasp of my breath. I didn't dare look back. We rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The trench ended abruptly, a wall of earth and barbed wire blocking our path. We were trapped. This way, Jameson yelled, pointing to a narrow gap in the wall. We squeezed through, the barbed wire tearing at our clothes and skin. On the other side was a small clearing, surrounded by the remnants of a forest. The fog was thinner here, and I could see the silhouettes of trees looming overhead. We can't stop, Jameson panted. We have to keep moving. But Carter had collapsed, his face pale and sweat-drenched. I can't go on, he gasped. Leave me. Not a chance, I said, grabbing his arm. We're not leaving anyone behind. With Jameson's help, we hauled Carter to his feet and continued our desperate flight. The sounds of pursuit were growing fainter, but I knew better than to trust it. This place was wrong, a twisted nightmare from which there was no escape. We stumbled through the forest, the twisted branches clawing at us like skeletal hands. The fog swirled around us, thickening again, obscuring our path. I could hear the distant moans, the rustle of movement. They were still following us. We emerged into a small clearing, and there, in the center, was a dilapidated cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but it was our only hope. We staggered towards it, our legs trembling with exhaustion. Jameson kicked the door open, and we tumbled inside. The cabin was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of decay, but it was shelter. We barricaded the door with whatever we could find and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. What are they? Carter asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, Jameson replied, his face drawn and haggard. But they're not human, not anymore. We sat in silence, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. The cabin creaked and groaned, the sounds of the forest outside growing fainter. But I knew we weren't safe, not really. The nightmare wasn't over, not yet. We took turns keeping watch, our nerves frayed to the breaking point. The hours dragged on, each one an eternity. The sounds outside grew quieter, but the sense of dread only deepened. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there, waiting. It was during my watch, just before dawn, that I heard it, a soft, scratching sound, like fingernails on wood. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was coming from the door. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Who's there? I called out, my voice shaking. There was no answer, just the scratching, persistent and maddening. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to wake the others. We needed to leave, now. But before I could move, the door exploded inward, shards of wood flying in all directions. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the pale light of dawn. It was the German soldier, his eyes burning with a malevolent light. Gehen, weg, he rasped, his voice a twisted parody of human speech. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely aim. The soldier took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. I could see the other figures behind him, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light. Jameson! Carter! I shouted, my voice breaking with fear. "They're here!" The others scrambled to their feet, weapons at the ready, but it was too late. The soldiers surged into the cabin, their cold hands grasping at us, their eyes filled with a hunger that was all too human. We fought desperately, but it was no use. They were too strong, too relentless. One by one my comrades fell, their screams echoing in my ears. I was the last one standing, my back against the wall, my rifle empty. The German soldier stood before me, his eyes boring into mine. I could see the torment in them, the pain of a soul trapped in a body that should have been dead. He reached out, his hand cold as ice, and touched my cheek. "Nicht hier," he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. "Nicht hier." The last thing I saw was his face, twisted in anguish, before everything went black. I woke up in a field hospital, my body battered and bruised, but miraculously alive. They told me I had been found wandering the battlefield, delirious and half dead. There was no sign of Jameson or Carter, no sign of the trench or the cabin. It was as if they had never existed. But I know the truth. I know what I saw. The forgotten trench, the undead soldiers, the nightmare that still haunts my dreams. I survived, but a part of me was left behind in that cursed place. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear their moans, the soft scratching at the door. A reminder that the past is never truly buried and the dead never really rest.